The Barker Karpis Gang was one of the most formidable criminal enterprises of the Depression era. Their activities ranged across the American Midwest during the early 1930s and included bank robberies, kidnappings, murders, and gun battles that captured national attention. At the center of this gang was a complicated blend of family ties, criminal mentorship, and strategic partnerships. The group is often remembered for its violent encounters with law enforcement and its connection to the expanding authority of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. However, the lesser-known but critically important piece of this story lies in a place many would not expect: Joplin, Missouri. The Barker family's roots were planted firmly in the Ozarks. Arizona Donnie Clark, better known later as Ma Barker, and her husband, George Elias Barker, raised 4 sons in the Midwest: Herman, Lloyd, Arthur, and Fred. The family lived in various towns in Missouri, including Webb City, a mining town adjacent to Joplin. During the early 1900s, this region was both economically vibrant and socially chaotic. The tri-state mining district brought an influx of workers and opportunity, but it also attracted crime, corruption, and vice. Saloons, gambling dens, and underground operations were part of the urban fabric, and the Barker children came of age in an environment where the lines between legal enterprise and criminal activity were often blurred. The first severe criminal episode tied to the family occurred in 1915. Herman Barker was arrested in Webb City for highway robbery after he and an accomplice held up several men during a card game in the back of a grocery store. He was arrested by Joplin police the following day, but the case was later dropped due to a lack of evidence. Nevertheless, the incident was a turning point. Shortly afterward, the Barker family left Missouri and moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma. This move was an attempt to escape growing legal trouble, but it did not sever the family's connections to the Joplin area. During the 1920s, the Barker boys escalated their involvement in crime. Lloyd Barker was arrested for his role in a mail train robbery in Baxter Springs, Kansas, which lies just over the border from Joplin. Arthur, Doc, Barker was arrested in Joplin in 1920 for auto theft. These early incidents illustrate that Joplin and its surrounding region remained a familiar base of operations for the Barker family, even as they relocated and expanded their reach. One of the most critical developments in the story of the Barker Karpis Gang was the relationship between Fred Barker and Herbert Allen, Deafy, farmer. Farmer was a con man and gambler who lived in the Joplin area and had known the Barkers for many years. His mother had reportedly taken care of the Barker children when they were young, which created a familial bond between the two families. By the late 1920s, Farmer owned a 23-acre farm located about 7 miles south of Joplin. Though unassuming in appearance, this property was a critical hub for criminal activity. Farmer's farm served as a hideout, communication center, and logistics base for a wide range of outlaws. These included not only the Barker Karpis Gang but also other major criminal figures of the era, such as Frank Nash, Harvey Bailey, and members of the Holden Keating Gang. The property functioned as an informal post office for criminals on the run, a place where messages could be left, deals could be negotiated, and fugitives could rest safely out of sight. Notably, it also served as the training ground for Fred Barker, whom Farmer mentored in the techniques and strategies of organized crime. Fred's association with Farmer helped launch his career as a serious criminal. In the early 1930s, Fred met Alvin, Creepy, Karpis while in prison, and the two men formed a partnership that would evolve into the Barker Karpis Gang. Karpis brought intelligence, ruthlessness, and an understanding of logistics. Fred Barker brought connections, loyalty, and the protective umbrella of his family, including his mother, Ma Barker, who accompanied the gang as they moved from place to place. The gang's first significant crime wave began in 1932. They carried out a series of bank robberies that were both daring and brutal. On June 17, they robbed a bank in Fort Scott, Kansas. The following month, they hit a bank in Concordia, Kansas, taking over $200,000 in cash and bonds. In August, they robbed a bank in Beloit, Wisconsin, securing another $50,000. These jobs were meticulously planned and executed with military precision. Violence was common. The gang did not hesitate to shoot anyone who resisted or stood in their way. In December 1932, the gang struck in Minneapolis, Minnesota. During a robbery at the Third Northwestern National Bank, they killed 2 police officers and a civilian. This was one of their bloodiest attacks and brought them to the attention of federal authorities. The public outcry was immediate. Newspapers labeled them as killers, and the FBI began dedicating significant resources to their capture. Despite the growing pressure, the gang continued its operations. In June 1933, they carried out their first significant kidnapping, abducting William Ham Jr., the president of Ham's Brewery in St. Paul, Minnesota. Ham was held for a ransom of $100,000. The transaction was completed, and Ham was released unharmed. The success of this operation emboldened the gang. On January 17, 1934, they kidnapped Edward Bremer, a wealthy banker and personal friend of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's family. Bremer was released after a $200,000 ransom was paid. Unlike the Ham case, the Bremer kidnapping drew direct attention from the White House. Federal agents increased their efforts, and the gang's visibility became a liability. Throughout these years of escalating criminal activity, the Joplin area farm remained an essential refuge. After the December 1931 murder of Howell County Sheriff C. Roy Kelly in West Plains, Missouri, Fred Barker and Alvin Karpis fled across the state. Accompanied by Ma Barker and her companion, they sought safety at Farmer's Farm. While the state and local authorities launched a search, the fugitives were hiding in plain sight, protected by the silence and loyalty of the region. Joplin's geographical location played a key role in its usefulness to the gang. Located in the southwestern corner of Missouri, it provided easy access to neighboring states. The terrain offered cover, and the rural setting minimized the risk of being seen or reported. Moreover, local law enforcement either lacked the resources or the will to confront Farmer. For years, his farm operated without interference. The extent to which local authorities were complicit or simply indifferent remains a matter of debate. However, the fact remains that some of the most wanted men in America were able to move through the region undetected. Herbert Farmer's influence was not limited to providing shelter. He acted as a criminal strategist, helping coordinate movement and communication between gang members and their associates. He also helped arrange safe passages and coordinated meetings with other outlaw groups. His farm was part of a broader network of safe cities and towns that included places like Hot Springs, Arkansas, and St. Paul, Minnesota. These cities had reputations for police corruption and were known to provide a haven to gangsters as long as they did not cause trouble locally. The Barker-Karpis gang's reliance on this network allowed them to evade capture longer than many of their contemporaries. But their luck began to run out in 1933. That year, the Kansas City Massacre shocked the nation. On June 17, FBI agents and local police officers were ambushed at Union Station while attempting to transport Frank Nash, a convicted criminal. Nash and 4 officers were killed in the hail of bullets. Though the Barker-Karpis gang was not directly involved in the massacre, evidence emerged that linked Herbert Farmer's farm to the planning of the attack. Farmer was arrested and charged with conspiracy in connection with the Union Station massacre. His wife, Esther, was also charged. They were both convicted and sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. The safe house near Joplin, which had served as a vital part of the gang's infrastructure, was now compromised. The arrest of Farmer removed a key piece of the gang's support system and signaled a turning point in their ability to operate freely. With the farm no longer available, the gang scattered. Some moved north, others traveled south. Fred and Ma Barker eventually settled in Florida. Alvin Karpis continued to coordinate the gang's remaining operations, but their days of unchecked dominance were drawing to a close. The FBI, newly empowered and highly motivated, was closing in. The unraveling of the Barker-Karpis gang had begun, and the once trusted safe zones that had protected them for years were no longer viable. What followed was a series of arrests, gunfights, and public showdowns that would end in tragedy and imprisonment, forever sealing the gang's place in the history of American crime. By 1934, the Barker-Karpis gang was on a downward trajectory. The FBI's national search was intensifying, and the safe zones that had protected the gang in earlier years were no longer secure. The loss of Herbert, Defee, Farmer and his Joplin area farm as a refuge was particularly damaging. For years, the Barker brothers, Alvin Karpis, and their associates had relied on the farm as a hidden base of operations, resting there between robberies, stashing cash, and coordinating with other criminal networks. When Farmer and his wife were convicted of conspiracy in the aftermath of the Union Station massacre and sentenced to prison, the farm was shut down, and the protective silence in southwest Missouri began to dissolve. Still, the gang pushed forward. The high-profile kidnappings of William Ham and Edward Bremer had brought in massive sums of ransom money, but they had also triggered a robust federal response. These crimes, particularly the Bremer case, attracted the attention of President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself. Bremer's father was a friend of the president, and the case was considered a national disgrace. J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI, used the momentum of public outrage to push for broader investigative authority and higher visibility for federal agents. In early 1935, the FBI scored a significant victory. Arthur, Doc, Barker, one of the key members of the gang, was captured in Chicago on January 8. He was arrested at an apartment where agents found not only weapons and cash, but also letters and a map leading them to a lakeside cottage in central Florida. That cottage, near the town of Ocklawaha, had been rented under false names by Fred Barker and his mother, Ma Barker. Fred and Ma had been living quietly in the cottage, using aliases and paying in cash. The house sat near Lake Weir and was surrounded by thick woods. It was an ideal hiding place, quiet, remote, and seemingly beyond suspicion. But with Doc's arrest and the materials recovered in Chicago, the FBI now knew precisely where to look. On the morning of January 16, 1935, more than a dozen federal agents surrounded the Ocklawaha cottage. They ordered Fred and Ma to surrender. There was no answer. When agents began moving in, gunfire erupted from inside the house. The standoff that followed lasted more than 4 hours. FBI agents fired tear gas into the building. Fred Barker returned fire repeatedly, and some reports claimed that Ma was shooting as well. However, later investigations would cast doubt on whether she had fired any weapon at all. When the shooting stopped, agents entered the house. They found Fred Barker dead in one of the bedrooms. His body had been riddled with bullets. Ma Barker was found nearby, also dead from multiple gunshot wounds. A submachine gun lay close to her body, but its position and the lack of fingerprints led to speculation that it had been placed there after the fact. The FBI insisted that Ma had died in an armed standoff. J. Edgar Hoover described her as the most dangerous woman in America, and a mastermind behind her son's crimes. Alvin Karpis and others who knew her, however, later rejected that claim. They said she was not a criminal leader, but rather a devoted mother who accompanied her sons, cooked their meals, and rarely questioned their activities. Regardless of her actual role, the image of Ma Barker dying in a gun battle with federal agents became a lasting part of American crime lore. Newspaper headlines announced the triumph of federal law enforcement. Photos of the bullet-ridden cottage and the recovered weapons were published across the country. The FBI's reputation soared, and the public narrative solidified. Ma Barker and her son had died in defiance of justice. Fred's death marked the end of the Barker family's involvement in the gang. With Herman long dead, Lloyd imprisoned, and Doc behind bars, the family line in organized crime was extinguished. Only one man remained at large, Alvin "Creepy" Karpis. Karpis had managed to avoid capture longer than any other top-tier criminal of the era. Intelligent, meticulous, and cold, he shifted between aliases and traveled cautiously. He continued to organize smaller-scale criminal activities while keeping a low profile. Despite the increased efforts by the FBI, Karpis managed to elude capture for another year. That changed on May 1, 1936, in New Orleans. FBI agents, tipped off to Karpis's location, surrounded his vehicle. According to some accounts, J. Edgar Hoover himself participated in the arrest. This moment became a widely publicized victory for the Bureau, though Karpis later contested the details. He claimed that Hoover had only arrived after the arrest was complete and that the agents already had him in custody. Regardless of who made the physical arrest, the result was the same. Karpis, the last significant figure of the Barker-Karpis gang, was in federal custody. He was tried and sentenced to life in prison. For more than 20 years, Karpis was incarcerated at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. He became the prison's longest-serving inmate and was known for maintaining a calm demeanor and avoiding trouble with other inmates. During his time at Alcatraz, he encountered other notorious criminals, including Al Capone. After Alcatraz closed in 1963, Karpis was transferred to different facilities and was eventually paroled in 1969. He lived out his final years in Canada and Spain, where he wrote a memoir that provided his perspective on the gang's activities, including his criticisms of the FBI's portrayal of Ma Barker. While the criminal careers of the gang's members had ended, their legacy lived on in law enforcement, popular culture, and regional memory, especially in the city of Joplin. Joplin's role in the Barker-Karpis gang story has often been overlooked in national histories. Yet, for those familiar with the facts, it is clear that the city and its surrounding region played a crucial role. Joplin was where the Barker brothers committed some of their first crimes. It was where Herman was arrested for robbery in 1915, and where Doc was taken into custody in 1920. It was also where the family found one of their strongest allies in Herbert Farmer, whose farm became the gang's trusted stronghold. The farm served as more than a hiding place. It was a communications center, a logistics base, and a hub for connections with other outlaws. Messages were passed through the property. Criminals from across the country used it as a rest stop or waypoint. The secrecy and trust surrounding the farm allowed the gang to plan robberies, avoid detection, and manage their sprawling network of accomplices. Joplin's location made it ideal. Its proximity to Kansas and Oklahoma provided quick escape routes. The terrain was wooded and rural, providing natural cover. Law enforcement at the time was often underfunded and overwhelmed, which allowed criminals to operate with little interference. The people in the area, many of whom had connections to the Barkers or to Farmer, were unlikely to report suspicious activity. Silence, whether born of fear, loyalty, or indifference, allowed the gang to thrive. But Joplin's complicity was not limitless. Once the federal government turned its attention to the region, the silence was broken. The conviction of Farmer ended the era of criminal refuge in Joplin. Federal agents began watching the area closely, and the farm that had once been a symbol of protection became evidence in a national conspiracy case. In the decades that followed, the story of the Barker Karpis Gang became legend. Books, films, and television shows fictionalized their lives, often focusing on the myth of Ma Barker as a criminal genius. Movies like Ma Barker's Killer Brood and Bloody Mama turned her into a larger-than-life figure. Songs and folktales celebrated their daring, but those who knew the truth remembered a different story, one rooted in desperation, violence, and the small towns that unknowingly nurtured one of the most dangerous gangs in American history. Today, the legacy of the Barker Karpis Gang remains a part of Joplin's hidden history. While the city has grown and changed, traces of that era still linger in historical archives, police records, and local memory. Joplin was not just a backdrop, it was a foundation. The gang's most crucial mentor lived there. Their early crimes were committed there. Their safe house operated there. And when things went wrong, it was to Joplin that they returned. The story of the Barker Karpis Gang is not only about shootouts and headlines. It is also about the way that small, quiet towns can become central players in national events. It is about the complexity of loyalty, the consequences of silence, and the unexpected places where history is made. The hills and backroads of Missouri may no longer shelter fugitives, but the legacy of the Barker brothers and their time in Joplin remains etched in the fabric of American true crime history.